I was out running errands and I thought this was a good place to stop maybe and make a video. Duke Roufus died yesterday. According to reports, he was 55 years old. He apparently passed in his sleep. Let me just start out by saying I send my deepest condolences to Duke's family, to the people who knew him, to his gym. I mean, after all, his gym was named Roufusport. He was the namesake of it. Duke had an incredible career. He was a very successful kickboxer. I don't know if he had like A+ wins, but he certainly had a decorated run. He was a WKA champion. He was a AKO champion, IKSF champion. And that was a big part of his life, but I think most fans obviously know him from the work that he did as a coach. He was highly successful. I mean, the list of athletes he's worked with are endless. Obviously, the Pettis brothers probably most notable among them all. But beyond that, Ben Askren, other champions like Tyron Woodley. He worked with Bilal Muhammad for a time, Paul Felder for a time, Matt Mitrione, Eric Koch, Eric Red Schaefer, Rose Namajunas, Pat Barry. I'm sure I'm Ben Rothwell. I'm sure I'm leaving out names, but even the ones I've named are, just very, very either commendable talents or some of the best of the time in which I've covered MMA. He built an institution in that area of the country, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I think he was obviously deeply instrumental in the careers of the Pettis brothers. He turned, obviously you don't want to take away the credit from the guys who made themselves champions like Anthony Pettis, like Sergio Pettis, but at the same time, I think under Duke was like a very good coach for them. This was a guy who had like a hard-nosed but kind of clever kickboxing style, and I think Anthony had a little bit more flash in his own style, but you can just see a lot of the wisdom and the style, frankly, from the way in which Duke taught and the way in which he practiced kickboxing. You could see it in both Pettis brothers, but certainly in Anthony as well. And again, look at the talent that he was a part of and how successful they all became. I mean, you just don't see many MMA coaches who can deliver consistently in that way. And even when Anthony lost the title, certainly Sergio never became a UFC champion, but he just had one of the best wins. Dude, Sergio Pettis just had one of the best wins of his career, one of the best highlight knockouts of the year. Look, there's an albino squirrel behind me. It's kind of interesting. But in all seriousness, he had this incredible win over Magomedov in Abu Dhabi, and Duke was a big part of that. Like, Duke was a very, very good coach. And as I mentioned, what I really loved about his style was that it was kind of hard-nosed. He didn't teach a style that was, resistant of contact or resistant of, physically mixing it up. But at the same time, he had a real clever sense of how to individualize a game and how to outsmart opponents and how to, he just had a sort of a next level in terms of his coaching ability, next level kind of vision. And I don't think any of the success that his students had was in any way accidental. One of the most important coaches of the 2010s, that's a true statement. One of the most successful coaches, frankly, in MMA history, that's a true statement. He was special. He was really special. I had not spoken to Duke in a couple of years, maybe less time than that, but I worked with Duke in 2014. I'll put some pictures on the screen here. I don't have any of us together, but I was looking through my photos last night when I got the news that he died, and he was a glory commentator. It was me. I was the ringside reporter. I wasn't a commentator, but I only did it for a short time. But Duke was the color commentator. For a while, it was Mauro Ranallo, and then it eventually became Ron Kruk. And so you can see some of these photos of Ron and Duke. And again, I wasn't there in the picture with them, but I'm the one who took these photos because they would do these warm-ups. And, I always found it so... I learned a lot talking to Duke, man. And Duke, I think he had such a passion for teaching. He loved. I don't know how much he loved being a fighter, but I mean, I'm sure he did, of course. But I can tell you that he absolutely adored being a coach, and he loved being a dad. He always talked about his family. He always talked about his wife. I don't think I ever had a conversation when I first met up with him where he didn't talk about, with just glowing pride, his kids. He loved his dogs. He was an animal lover as well. I think that was a big part of his life. And I want to bring up something because I think a lot of fans might not know it, but I actually believe it's an important part of his story. I bring it up not to besmirch him, quite the opposite. There was one time in his career, I think around 2014, 2015, something like that, where he got embroiled in a scandal. Not a scandal, but, well, I mean, controversy, I think is the way to put it. There was an amateur kickboxer who had died in a show that was his gym was promoting. Now, he wasn't there. One of his partners was there cornering a guy, and one of the amateur fighters died, and there was just all kinds of reasons why that happened. You know, kickboxing wasn't properly regulated, although to Duke's point, he said he tried to get it regulated. The guy there was weight cuts, there was weigh-ins. So they did same-day weigh-ins at those events, which is just, you know, I know folks think that, like, oh, the problem with weight cutting is that you don't have same-day weigh-ins. Same-day weigh-ins is how people get killed, quite literally. And there's some other things that went wrong, but what ended up happening was after the guy died, there was I think the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel did a big report on it, and, you know, there was questions raised about oversight and, you know, what more could have been done to save him. And at the time, a bunch of fighters, you know, kind of bashed the gym culture that Duke had, in their words, cultivated for the time in which they were there. That you know, he was harsh on them, and some said it was abusive. You can look this all up. It had a big media cycle. Rose Namajunas was one of the ones who had said this. Eric Schaefer was sort of I think someone who had a big falling out with Duke. And you know, I'm not bringing this up to say that, like, oh, Duke was this terrible guy that the world didn't really know. Far from it, actually. I actually feel like even before that scandal had broke, he had become significantly more humane and smarter about the way in which they taught. I mean, they didn't do by his own admission at that time, they didn't do strength and conditioning. They just tried to spar their way into strength and conditioning. And you can imagine, like, the kind of culture and practices that come with that. It leads itself to, you know, not necessarily the best kind of outcomes. But I remember talking to Duke during that time and then after it, and I really believe he was wounded by that scandal. I think he was wounded by what I think he perceived as his own failures. I think he was wounded by how others were hurt as a result. And I think it really changed him. And I changed him for the better. From my understanding, you know, all kinds of practices, both about who made amateur teams, who made pro teams, practices in the training room. You know, it was still a hard-nosed gym. Of course, if you want to get world-class results, you have to get world-class training. It's a tough sport. But that he became much more, you know, he was tough, but much more fair. And much more, rather than to scold you, to put his arm around you. And to give you tough love, but tough and love. And to me, I found Duke when I knew him. And again, maybe people who were around at that time have a different story. I can only tell you the story that I know. But I really believe that whole episode, and it wasn't just that episode, it had started before that, but it really, you know, it's this inflection point. He became, I think he was, at the end of the day, again, this is my perception, he became much more humane. And I think he always wanted to be and was headed in that direction, but it really, really forced him to look at the things that people had been saying and what had happened around him. And if you care and you really want to do right, you have to make changes. And I think he did. I found him to be, again, during the time that I knew him, just a lovely guy. A lovely guy who really did care. Cared about doing a good job, cared about the Pettis brothers, whose father was murdered, and he took them under his wing. You know, cared about the results of the team, cared about, I think, again, certainly after that event, about creating a training environment where, yes, people were pushed and challenged, but where they could thrive as well. And none of us are perfect, and we're all going to make mistakes. But the key is, what do you do with them when they happen? Do you turn them into a positive? Do you listen to what people have to say? Do you try and do better? And I really think he did. I really believe he did. I really, truly believe he wanted to do right to the world, to his students, to his gym, to his name. And you can't go back and fix everything. I think some of those things can't be fixed, and, I've made mistakes in the past that I hate about my life, and I can't fix all of them, and that eats me up at night. My only hope is that, however imperfectly, you can move forward into the future, and the future's unwritten. You can write new chapters. As I indicated, I think Duke was already headed in that direction at the time that thing had hit, but after that, I really believe he just became committed to that lifestyle, to that vision, to that kind of coaching, to tough love but uplifting in the end. And I think I think more than anything, that speaks to who he is he wasn't set in his ways. He may have had some, again, during that moment, he may have had some practices that needed some updating. He updated them. I think that speaks so highly of him. And it speaks to the guy that I knew, who just seemed like a lovely Midwestern guy who loved combat sports, who had a knack for it, who loved being a teacher, who loved learning wisdom and then sharing that wisdom, cultivating a culture around that. And I think his results and the success of his fighters really speak to that. And I think, you saw what some of the Pettis brothers had been, or I didn't see what Sergio said, but I saw what Anthony said. And Duke changed his life. If I may say one last thing, it's just been a weird year in MMA. And to see people I literally worked with, I worked with Jordan Breen, I worked with Duke Roufus, and they've died. I don't know, man. It has messed me up a little bit. I mean, death is a part of life, and people in the industry or you see on TV, they get old and time moves on, but I feel like it's a little different when Duke was not that much older than me, 9 years, it's not a huge amount. And to see him pass away so suddenly, so early, he had so much time left, you would think. Same with Jordan. I don't know how to explain what I'm feeling, but it just feels odd. If I may say something, this is why it's important to grow and to learn and to adapt and to get better. I think the last part of Duke's life was absolutely committed to that, and I think he did an enormous amount of good for himself and the people around him as a consequence. And I wish he had more time, but he made good use, I think. No one is perfect. I'm not perfect. You're watching this. You're not perfect. Neither was Duke. None of us are. But if you can make a difference in people's lives, and if you can learn and adapt and grow, you can do a lot of good. And we don't know how much time we have. You're watching this. You don't know how much time you have. I don't know how much time I have. You think you have so much. You think you're going to grow into your 80s, and you're just going to see so much and share so much. And life has a funny way of having its own plans for you. If you're seeing this and you feel like it's time for you to make a change, hopefully this video can help you. Try to be good to yourself and try to be good to others. That's all you can do in life, I suppose. I think Duke was a hell of a character. I think he was a hell of a guy. I think he did a lot of good for himself, for Milwaukee, for martial arts, for combat sports, for kickboxing, for the Pettis brothers and many athletes who worked with him. And that ride had some bumps, and there are some legitimate criticisms to be made, I suppose, of some of the things that, any coach does. But I found Duke to be a really lovely guy, and I found the story of his life and how I think he continued even into his coaching career to really take to heart what it meant to do right by people. I have such profound respect for that. I really do. I'm going to miss him. And what a guy. What a lovely guy. Rest in peace to Duke Roufus. My condolences to the entire Roufusport family, and I'm glad I got a chance to know him and to work with him, however brief. My path has been enriched by crossing paths with Duke Roufus. Rest in peace.